Hi, my name is Mike Kaply. I work for Mozilla as the technical lead for Firefox Enterprise. My job is basically all things enterprise from a development perspective. It's a funny story though. I was at this conference. Well, first of all, let's talk about agenda. This is the agenda for today. Where we were, what did we do to solve that problem, where are we now, and what are we doing next? So the first thing is, where were we? So 3 years ago, I was at this conference, and funny things were happening in my life at that point in time that I couldn't tell anybody about at the conference. I'd already accepted a job offer to work for Mozilla at that time, but I couldn't announce it at the conference. But my presentation at that time was basically how to do Firefox in the enterprise. The title being Everything You Want to Know But Were Afraid to Ask. And at that conference, I talked about using CCK2, which is a tool I wrote for managing Firefox, using an autoconfig file, using distribution.ini. Basically, I went over the do-it-yourself aspects of enterprise Firefox. So it's kind of funny, when I took that job at Mozilla, the intention was not for me to work on enterprise. I was taking a completely different job, and through a lot of fortuitous things that happened over the past couple years. A year ago, Mozilla decided that enterprise was important, and I got to do this job. So ironically, my job now is to undo all the things that I told you to do 3 years ago, because I'm slowly killing all of the things that I told you how to do and replacing it with genuinely real enterprise management features. So there's a good side, which is that I'm doing it right, but the bad side is that I'm so sorry that I told you to use all those tools that I'm slowly making sure they don't work anymore. So my bad. So we realized that we had a problem. You know, I'd been working for years to try to solve this problem on my own, and Mozilla said, you know what, we need to solve this problem. So what did we do? Well, starting with Firefox 60, we built policy management into the browser. So our thought process was, what can we do as a way to kind of start things very basic? Because originally we weren't going to kind of go like jump all in, so we wanted to start with something basic. So what we did was we created this generic, we call it the policy engine, and it was designed to use just a simple JSON file for configuration, and that's the way we architected it. We looked at policies that were available via Chrome. We looked at the policies that I had created in the CCK2. We looked at common cases. We got feedback, and that created the basically the MVP for doing the policy engine. So we put a basic level of policies. Initially 45 plus policies that we shipped within Firefox 60. And then we got feedback that shipping just the policy JSON file without Windows GPO support probably wasn't good, so we went ahead. Originally we thought the GPO support was going to be a lot more painful than it actually ended up being. I was surprised how straightforward it was, so we were able to ship on Firefox 60 with GPO support for Windows. At that time, I'll be honest, I wasn't as tuned into Mac administration. You know, I talked to folks that were doing it, but we didn't know exactly what we needed to do for Firefox. But luckily we had people that did. So that's when we added macOS support. So starting with Firefox 63, we added a feature that everybody is very happy with, which is on Windows we had a preference that allowed you to use certificates from the enterprise, the root on Windows, but we did not have that feature for Mac. So we added that feature in Firefox 63. Unfortunately, we could not put it on the ESR because it required some internal changes to our security libraries. So you'll have to wait for if you're using the ESR, you'll have to wait for ESR 68 in order to use that. It does not support client certificates. It does not support, I'm going to forget the name, the new crypto stuff on Mac for doing devices. I'm looking into that seriously to figure out if there's something we can do. But for now, the feedback I've gotten in general from folks is that this alone solved a big problem, because importing certificates into Firefox has always been a pain, and so this makes things a lot easier. Now the other big thing we did is we introduced configuration profiles in Firefox 64, and we also backported it to 60.4. So the configuration profile support was implemented as well, first of all, I need to give a shout out to Stephen Pohl from Mozilla, who implemented this. He's our main Mac guy. He did a tremendous job. He built a mapping layer, so essentially anything we put in the specification, the JSON specification automatically becomes available via using the configuration profiles. So when I add a new policy, it's automatically available using the system that we built. So there's a mapping layer that automatically maps the reading the user preferences, the configuration preferences, and then maps them directly into the policy engine. So it works really, really well. Some interesting things to note about that, like I said, all JSON is mapped. The other thing we did is, when we originally built the JSON, we were like really nerdy about it. So it uses these deeply nested structures to make everything really make perfect sense. And then people were like, some of us use command line Mac stuff to do configuration profiles, and that's really difficult with the structure that we built. So we added a shortcut that anything that's nested inside the policy, and I'll show you that in a minute, you can just use double underscore between the two things, and it makes one big long command line. So you don't need to use any of our mapping if you're just using the command line to add any policy to Mac. And again, even if it's not in my sample plist file that I put in on our server, it's available. But the most important thing to remember is that in order to make this work, we had to add an enterprise policies enabled preference, because that's the first thing we query, so that we only read the file if we know that there are preferences set. So you always need to set enterprise policies enabled to true in your configuration profile, so that all of this will work. So next up, we needed better documentation, so we wrote better documentation. We actually had a team working on putting together a ton of documentation on managing, customizing, all the different things that you can do. It leads towards being a little more Windows focused, mainly because some of the stuff you do on Windows is a little more complicated, and so we needed documentation for it. But we also have information on Mac configuration. So I would encourage you can go there to get all that information. The other thing you can do there is we have a support forum where you can get answers to various questions if you have any questions about deploying and customizing Firefox. I'm not on there as much as I should be, but people harass me when the questions don't get answered, so they will get answered. We also have some great community members that are actively participating in that forum. So where are we now then? We have 55 plus policies now, and we have many more that are coming. Firefox 66, which was released, what's today? Tuesday. Today. It was released today. No, last week. Sorry. It was released last Tuesday. I was on vacation last week. We added support for SSL min-max version. Only one new policy, but it's one people have been requesting for a while. For Firefox 67, we're going to have support for disabling the captive portal, because that ran into problems, disabling network prediction, disabling extension updates, and adding a support menu. That was a CCK2 feature that people wanted, so I added that. One of the more interesting things that's coming in Chrome 67, though, is support for Chrome storage managed in extensions. The reason that's interesting is because you'll finally be able to use policy to set preferences for extensions. So if a web extension supports Chrome storage managed, then you can set those preferences via policy, and then the extension will query those preferences. And there are a number of main, large extensions that already supported Chrome Storage Managed. They were just waiting for us to put the support into Firefox. So that's exciting. That's coming very soon. But we've got some other stuff coming up as well. Policies. So one of the biggest requests that I get for policy support is everybody wants me to support every single Firefox preference. They want me to support arbitrary preferences. And my answer to that is, you all set all kinds of preferences that you don't need to set. And if I added support for adding arbitrary preferences, then I'm just like prolonging the problem. So we're trying to come up with some middle ground. I don't mean that in a mean way. It's that the problem is a lot of people, you set a preference in Firefox 40, because that's what you needed, and that preference went away a long time ago. So adding support for just any preference, doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow a whitelist of preferences that you can set arbitrarily. And then when you come to me and say, I need this preference, I'll go, yeah, we probably should have that preference, and I'll just add it to the list. And so it's going to involve some of the more obscure preferences, like people want to turn off or turn on puny code support, so that you see real international URLs, right? That's something that some people need, but we don't have a policy for that. But it's an edge case, so I don't necessarily want to add a unique policy for that. The balance here is that I don't want to be like Internet Explorer, which has like 1,000 policies, but at the same time, I want to make sure that the policies that y'all need are available to you. So that's our plan for Firefox 68. So I already have like a pretty thorough list of things that people want to be able to do. Change the new tab page, remove and add things from the new tab page, set lots of different random preferences. But if there's something specific that you wish was available via policy that's not, just let me know, and we'll talk about how you can do that in a minute. One thing for US folks, it keeps coming up that people want, we don't fully support the Department of Defense STIG preferences, so you still need to use autoconfig for those. By 68, I should have support for every preference that's in the DoD STIG, so that'll be taken care of. For macOS, we're planning on doing a signed PKG file. I've heard from people that that's important, so I went ahead and added it to our list, so hopefully that makes people happy. I guess having a DMG isn't good enough, but I don't know enough about that. But supposedly this is going to be really easy to do. It probably won't come out with 68 day and date, but whatever we do, we're going to backport to the ESR. But our plan, that's targeted by the build team for second quarter of this year, so you'll see the signed PKG. On Windows, we're going to do legacy browser support. Chrome has this feature where you can designate a zillion URLs that open up in IE, and the way it works is that when you go to those URLs, they flip you over to IE, and then when you navigate away, it flips you back to Chrome. So they open source all of that code, so we're going to take all of that code and port it to Firefox, so you'll have, if you have any Windows deployments you need to worry about that still use IE, you'll have that. Interesting side note, as we've been looking into this, I'm in awe of the number of enterprises that Internet Explorer is still their primary browser. I honestly didn't know. We thought Chrome had made more of an inroads into enterprise. It hasn't made as much of an inroads as we thought. Google's made inroads on the server, but on the client, there are so many legacy applications that still require Internet Explorer that lots of big companies still use it as their primary browser. So that's on Windows. And then some other interesting things we're doing this year is we're going to do more user research. We want to figure out if we're missing some segment, something. So we have some user research folks signed up so we can figure out how to better support people in enterprise in general. Because this is something that Mozilla as a company is not familiar with, right? I mean, it's not something we've done, so it's kind of new to us. We've got a lot of people that have a lot of enterprise experience because they've come from companies like Cisco and BlackBerry, so we've got the people, but we need to figure out how to make it more of a thing with inside Mozilla. So on that note, we've got one other thing we're doing. I'm announcing officially today, because it's not public yet, we're going to be piloting paid enterprise support. So we're going to allow you to basically pay us, and we will give you SLA level enterprise support. So this is going to go beyond the types of things that Chrome offers. You'll be able to report bugs to us, and we'll work with our development teams to get those bugs fixed, as well as making feature requests and being able to prioritize those with our development teams, as well as standard things like getting help with customization and deployment. So if that's something you're interested in, we have this website is where you go. It's a lead generation essentially for our Salesforce backend. So if you sign up there, then and you meet our initial criteria, because right now we're piloting. The criteria are we're not going with like really large deployments right now, and we're focusing on US only for the pilot. That's not going to be a long-term thing, and it's primarily because there's only a handful of people doing it, and we can only work US hours. So that's the main reason that we're piloting in the US right now. But if this is something that interests you to actually pay us for support, then I'd love to talk to you about this. Because we're excited about offering this, and we think it can be a differentiator for us, because again, we're not just offering, get help with customization deployment. We're going to work to actually have bug fixes and things like that. So that brings up the big question, which is what about CCK2 and autoconfig? What about all the things that I told you to do 3 years ago? So that says Mozilla Confidential down there. Ignore it. It's because of the template I used. All right, so the CCK2. The CCK2 is going to continue to work mostly. I'm actually fixing some issues with it right now. Firefox 68 is where things are going to get interesting. And the reason is because the way the CCK2 works is it takes advantage of the fact that the autoconfig file, which is this file that you could put in Firefox, a JavaScript file in Firefox, basically can do anything it wants. And we turned that off by default in Firefox 63, but it's a preference flip to just turn it back on. So it was an inconvenience for people, but once they realized that it was just a preference, they were able to flip it. The reason we did that is because we discovered in the wild that a lot of people were using autoconfig to hijack Firefox. So one of the bigger problems we have inside of Mozilla is you would not believe the amount of companies, antivirus companies, that hijack search for Firefox and take it for themselves. And so we're taking a more active approach in protecting our users, and so that's one of the reasons that we did this. We have no plans to, so what we're doing then, and this goes on to the autoconfig section, we'll sandboxing it by default. Now, what that means essentially is that if you look at what autoconfig was designed to do in its original days, it was designed to set and lock preferences. That was its only purpose. And query some environment variables and things like that. All that functionality is still going to be available via autoconfig. So if you have a preference that's not available via policy and you really want to set it, you'll be able to use autoconfig to set and lock that preference. That will not be going away at all. But what will happen is that access to do the really interesting things in Firefox will be going away. But I'm not going to give a firm date for that because our goal is to move as much functionality from the CCK2 into Firefox, which then allows us to turn off to sandbox autoconfig. So I'll be honest, I've been getting less and less problem reports with CCK2, and I know it's broke on Firefox 67, 66 maybe. So I know people are using it less, but I'm going to do my best to continue to support it so that people that need it can. But at the same time, I'm working very hard to get as many features as I can into Firefox proper so that you have the right tools and things that you need in order to do that. But again, ESR, we have no plans to sandbox it. So if for some reason you need the functionality of CCK2 or some other tool you're using, there are other people that use the autoconfig to make really complex configurations. If you use the ESR, you won't run into this problem at all. And again, I'm not going to give a timeline for that because I really don't know. We haven't seen a lot of hijacking lately from it. The changes we made seem to have a good effect. So I'm on hold right now, but that's something you need to look out for. So the sooner you can switch to using our configuration profiles and getting away from using CCK2 and autoconfig, the better off you'll be. The other thing about autoconfig, I was talking to somebody in the hall, there are other applications that drop autoconfig files in that overwrite the autoconfig that you did, which is a common problem. So that's one of the disadvantages of using autoconfig. So again, moving to configuration profiles means that all the problems you had with autoconfig will go away. Now, distribution.ini, I told people how to use. Just don't use it. I should never have told anybody how to use that. It was never intended for the purposes that I told people to use it for. And so, again, part of my job is telling people to not use that. So there shouldn't be anything you need to do with distribution.ini anymore. If you have to, use autoconfig to set preferences. Otherwise, you should use configuration profiles. And if there's some core CCK2 feature that you absolutely need that I have not done yet, let me know and we'll figure out how to make it happen. Okay. So now the cool thing though is what we do is all open source. So if you're interested in actually helping make all of this happen, you can do so. The policy templates GitHub repository is where we keep all the documentation for all the policies. You can see all of the enterprise policies. This is a link to the source code inside of Firefox that has the policy code, and if you want to go through our bug list and help us fix bugs or open new bugs against the policy engine, you can do that with that link that goes to the Bugzilla link. This is how you get a hold of me. I'm on the Mac admin Slack. I only hang out in the Firefox group though because I don't have time for all the other things, so find me there. I'm on GitHub, Twitter. Most of my Twitter is not tech stuff though. My blog, sadly, is not as updated as it could have been in the past, which makes me sad, but I just don't have the kind of bandwidth to do that anymore. But I've been trying. So if you have something you want me to talk about, I'll be more than happy to do that. So real quick before we go to Q&A, this is kind of short. Originally, I was going to talk about the actual mobile configs, the config profiles, but most of you know what to do with the files I produce, so I figured it would be more informative to tell you about what we did and what we're going to do and give you time to ask like any question you have, any policy requests you have. We can go through that. So this is the GitHub repository for policy templates. In here you can see we document every policy that we've implemented so far. This is the nesting that I was talking about. So like in order to do authentication, originally we're like, well, we should lump everything in these nice categories and it'll make it look really pretty when you write the JSON file. But then we realized that nobody's actually going to use the JSON file unless you're on Linux. So that's why we added support for using the underscore to shortcut everything. And the other thing I've started doing is I'm actually moving towards Chrome syntax for a lot of policies if they're already implemented. So for instance, the SSL version min and version max, which aren't here for some reason. Oh, because I probably haven't merged the... Yeah, oops, I should fix that. Hey, I'm going to do like every... Oh, no, it's merged. Wait, it's right there. Okay, I don't know why it's not showing up. Anyway, so all the policies are documented, but in the future, we're going to look to Chrome and try to copy the syntax that they're using. Okay, now I'm concerned because I did a release that had... Oh, I screwed up my wiki syntax. That's the problem. Look at that. Okay, I need to fix that. So this is where we document all the policies. This is where you can download Windows group policy files. And then for Mac, I have the plist file that contains, and I do update that as best I can. But again, I can't promise it. But again, this plist file is just an example of what it could look like. You'll need to go in for some of these and look at the JSON documentation to figure out, what are the enums that we're using for a particular value. This is supposed to be true, false. What are the names? So you'll start with this file, this plist file, and work from there to figure out what you want to actually change. Let's see. Okay. So yeah, and you'll see I have a ton of people requesting things in the policy, and we're doing the best we can, but it's basically a one-man show with me. And so we're working on getting more resources this year, but it's mainly about prioritizing what policies people want and figuring out what that should be. So, all right, I think that's all I wanted to cover as part of my presentation. And now I want to open it up to any questions or something that I missed that you would love for me to talk about related to Firefox policy.
So not so much of a question, but actually a vote of thank you. Thank you very much, Mike, for what you've done. It's certainly made a big difference to the environment I manage on both our Windows and the Mac side. Thank you very much. And just to add, really, for those of you that are creating config profiles for Firefox, another shout out to a nice GUI tool, Profile Creator, which you may have been hearing something about. There's a manifest or template for Firefox in Profile Creator that gives you a really nice, easy way to make profiles. I've been wondering about that.
I think I read that. So do they take mine and they can make it so you actually have like drop downs for the different selections?
Yeah, pretty much.
Like that? Okay.
Sort of build your profile by the numbers.
Cool. So who does the person that does that here?
He's not, is it? It's Eric Berglund.
Okay. I just need to make sure. I want to be able to communicate with them as I make new changes so they can make changes.
He's on the Slack, and there's a Profile Creator channel in the Slack.
Okay. All right. I'll actually interact with and make sure as I add new policies, they know about them. So some of the new policies are going to be kind of interesting. So it's kind of funny. On Windows, Chrome had to do this hack for some of their policies. So like to add bookmarks on Chrome, you want an arbitrary amount of bookmarks, but there's no way to do arbitrary amount of things in group policy. So basically what they did is they put an entry field up and have you paste raw JSON inside of the entry field, and that's what you set as your group policy, which is annoying, and I thought it was annoying at first, but as I investigated more, I'm like, well, dang it, that's the only way to do this on Windows is to have basically blobs of group policy. So we actually added support for blobs in our policy. On Mac, they'll be nicely structured in the plist file. On Windows, they'll be blobs. And then in the JSON, they'll look correct. And we're going to use those in the future to add support for managed bookmarks. So essentially what we did with bookmarks on the policy, in hindsight, was like overkill. Like we totally over-engineered how to do bookmarks because we wanted you to be able to customize it. And so that resulted in this arbitrary limit of 10 bookmarks, which is now 50 bookmarks, but it's not as flexible as we want it to be. So in hindsight, what Chrome chose to do is basically, look, there's a set of bookmarks you want your user to have. We're going to put it in a folder that you name, and then every time the browser boots, we're going to wipe that folder out and rebuild it, because that's what you want. You want a set of bookmarks that a user always has. So we're going to keep the old method and then add that new method, so hopefully that'll make the whole concept of doing managed bookmarks more logical than it currently is. So yeah, when I look to Chrome when I'm trying to get some ideas on how to do things, but our goal is to be better than them in the long run, because, and that's one of the things I realized about the preferences problem, because at first I was being kind of, not jerky, but basically my attitude was, well, you can't customize it in Chrome, why should I be able to customize it in Firefox? And mainly my attitude was, that's what I was thinking, and honestly, I'll be honest, that was the total wrong thinking. The reality is this can differentiate us. And we've given you all these preferences in the past, so there's no reason I shouldn't give you these preferences in the future. I just need to figure out a way to do it that isn't giving access to the whole world. Because what we've discovered is a lot of people set preferences and they don't necessarily know the why and the result of them setting them. And I don't want to be in a situation where people are setting preferences that make their environment less secure or make it slower. So each of those preferences is going to have an explanation as to what it does and whether or not you want to set it. So in the long term, we're actually going to end up with more policies than Chrome, I think, because we're going to start allowing all of these arbitrary preferences. And I appreciate the thank you. You know, I tell people my whole life has come full circle, because I remember working with Mozilla when we formed the Mozilla Foundation, trying to convince them that enterprise was important. And this was years, 10 plus years ago. And then I got to do it as part of my consulting company, doing Firefox Enterprise. And when I went to work for Mozilla, I genuinely thought that I wasn't going to be able to do this anymore, because it wasn't something Mozilla was interested in. And the job that I took was not enterprise related. So when I got the opportunity to do enterprise within Firefox, I'm like, well, yeah, this is what I've always wanted to do. And I'm honestly excited that I get to finally do, as part of Mozilla, this work, as opposed to the hacks and things that I've had to do over the years. So I'm very happy that I'm able to do it, so thank you. Any other questions? Over here. Make sure you catch it.
Will you be deprecating user.js files, or what's happening with them?
Will we be deprecating user.js files? That's a great question. More interesting than the user.js file are user content and user Chrome. If you don't know what those are, there's these two files that you can put in your profile directory that allow you to arbitrarily modify Chrome and content with CSS. But what you might not realize is that we have this thing on Firefox called Zibble, XPL, and it essentially allows you to do XML bindings via CSS, which can be JavaScript. So essentially you can use user Chrome and user content CSS to, again, break out of the sandbox that we've created and arbitrarily mess with Firefox. And there are websites, entire websites dedicated to using those files to override signature requirements on add-ons and all kinds of crazy things, which again, I understand that people love their browser and want to go crazy hacking it, but where we live is this weird balance between wanting to keep our users secure and preventing malware and other things from modifying Firefox, while at the same time giving power users the ability to do the things that they want to do. And it's a weird place to be in. So to answer your question, is user.js we're not as concerned about. It just allows you to set arbitrary preferences in the profile. And so that's not on our list of things that are going away. User content, user Chrome come up every couple months. They pop up again because we discovered that somebody is doing something insanely crazy with them. We're looking at ways to give the functionality of user content, user Chrome, without the security holes that they introduce, similar to Autoconfig. So user.js, no. User Chrome and user content. If you have legitimate reasons for using those, I'd love to have more information about that. The main place we've seen them is for accessibility. There are some people that use user Chrome and user content to make fonts arbitrarily large, to do high contrast on every website, things like that. If we're not doing that well, we need to know about that so we can fix it in the browser, so that you don't have to use hacks like that in order to solve those problems. So, long answer to a short question. Yeah, we're going to keep user.js around. Autoconfig sandbox, user Chrome, user content are on the chopping block, but I don't know when. Who's got another one?
Got a Windows question.
Sure, I'll take a Windows question. And you might get booed by the audience, though, so be careful.
You're offering PKGs. Are you going to offer MSIs?
We do offer MSIs.
Oh, right, because I was told you didn't, so I didn't.
We started offering MSIs 3 releases ago. I will warn you, we did the same thing as Chrome. It's a repackage of the EXE. It's not a real MSI. Honestly, the reason we had to do that is because our update infrastructure doesn't work well with the MSI database, so there were all kinds of reasons. But we also have a bug right now where we realize we're not putting the version correctly into the MSI, which we're going to fix. So that's one of the reasons we haven't put them on our download pages, because we were really looking for people to test them and figure them out. And then, of course, we finally got MSIs, and then somebody last week was like, well, do you have MSI X yet? And I'm like, what? And then I find out there's yet another packaging format that Microsoft's created. No, we do not have MSI X files, and my goodness, it took us so long to do MSI, I can't imagine how long it'll take us to do MSI X. So and then people ask me for ADM files instead of ADMX. I'm like, no. Do you know how long it's if you've ever looked at the ADM syntax versus the ADMX, which is XML based, no, I am not going to learn how to write ADM files so that I can support, Windows 98 users. I guess it would be Windows 2000 servers to do ADM. I don't even know. No. ADMX is all we're doing, and we do have MSIs, and we're going to move forward. And hopefully Apple won't come out with yet another situation where we have to build yet another solution for managing on Mac. So.
Hi, Mike. Have you guys been looking at doing any of the iOS app management, like app config for the iOS app? Or?
That's a good question. I hadn't really thought about that until some of the presentations that I've been to today and the boot camp conference yesterday. I'm going to go back and talk to our team about that, whether we should look into supporting mobile config on Firefox iOS. Honestly, I just don't think it's been on anybody's radar. And now that we understand it better, there's probably more we could do. So yeah, my plan is to take that back and see what folks have to say about that. Yeah.
So similar to Ben's question, have you investigated or are you planning to look into deployment via the Apple Mac App Store?
So the App Store problem is something we can't solve. Apple does not allow browsers that use other rendering engines on the App Store.
Okay.
So like Chrome is not on the App Store. And you also have to be sandboxed, and there's all we're always evaluating it and figuring out if we can make it happen, but we don't have any near-term plans to get on the App Store because there are restrictions that we have to get around. The same thing is true on Windows. Microsoft has very particular sandboxing requirements in order to be on the Windows Store, and we're just not able to meet the requirements. So at this point, I don't know of any plans. But if anybody knows anything like that we could be doing differently to try to make that easier, I'd love to hear about it. But Apple does not make it easy to solve that particular problem.
Thank you.
All right, we still got 10 minutes. Ask me anything.
Or not.
All right, is this content, y'all? Is this good? All right. So I want to encourage you. Some people didn't know we had mobile configuration profiles because we don't really have a good way to publicize the work that we're doing. So here I am telling you we have configuration profiles. So you can configure your Firefox using that. And again, if you have any requirements for things that you need that I did not implement, just let me know and we'll see about getting it implemented. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I came in late, but you can now specify using certificates in a keychain.
Yeah. We added that. You can't do it on the ESR, but we added it in Firefox 60. I had it on my earlier chart. We do have it. It'll be on the ESR with 68. That reminds me, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, and I don't remember the name. Search. What is the token? People have been asking about better support for crypto. That's what I'm trying to remember. Crypto. You're searching up the wrong thing. No. The crypto token support for devices on Mac is something people have been desperately asking for. I'm trying to work with our security team to get that implemented. So right now we're stuck using the old interfaces that we have for doing like physical security devices, but hopefully we'll have that soon because I know Apple's deprecated the old CF token interface, and so we need to get that implemented. So that's on our list. The security team is like a completely different team, and we're working trying to work closer with them because a lot of the enterprise requirements we run across involve certificates and things like that. So what I'm getting at is if you have particular needs around certificates that we're not solving, I'd love to hear about them, because the more people we have saying, if we had this certificate support, we could deploy X number of workstations, X number of Macs, then that helps me take a better argument to my security team to tell them why it's important. We've already heard that there are, like in the US in particular, there are government deployments that are dependent on some of that stuff. So if that's something that's important to you, I'd love to hear about it so that we can let the security team know about that.
So is the certificate import automatic, or do I have to tell you?
You have to set a preference to get the security import to be automatic. At this point, we chose not to do it by default. If you're curious about why we do what we do, we have a security blog where one of our security engineers did a long blog post where he talked about why we have our own certificate policy separate from using the operating system. That's something that we debate internally at Mozilla all the time as to why we do that. With Firefox 68 ESR, we're probably going to switch to flipping that preference on by default on the ESR. And we're looking at what we can do to flip that preference in situations where we know the user is messed up. Antivirus companies are notorious for dropping a certificate in and then basically man in the middling your HTTPS connection. And to the user, it just looks like a broken connection. They don't know what to do to fix it. And the answer is you have to flip a preference that you do in about config. So it's not a very user-friendly situation. We're trying to resolve it. But if we were to flip that preference by default, we're basically saying that any certificate that's trusted on your operating system, we trust. And we're not ready to do that on behalf of the user yet. We want administrators and users to make that decision, which is why we made a policy available to flip that. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'll be around the whole conference, so if you have any questions or need anything, feel free to come see me. And thank you for your time, and thank you for all your work that you do because for the record, it was the work of the admin community that helped make this happen. Because when we decided we were going to implement it, the first place I took my developer was to the Firefox on the Mac admin channel, and we had ideas as to how we were going to implement it, and the community said, no, you don't want to do it that way. And basically, Mac admin community dictated this design. So we switched how we were doing this because of you, and so hopefully this is exactly what you need, because like I said, we were going to do it go down a completely different path. And everybody said, no, you need to do it this way, and Stephen did, and that's how we ended up this way. So thank you for your contributions in helping me to build exactly what you all need. So thanks.